The red and blue lights cut through the early evening like a knife. They flashed once, twice, then stayed on. James Carter felt it before he saw it, that tightening in the chest, the instinctive slowing of breath, the years of lived memory pressing down all at once. He eased his old gray pickup to the curb, hands steady on the wheel, turn signal clicking even though no one else was around. The street was quiet, too quiet. The police cruiser stopped hard behind him, engine growling low, lights washing over the cracked pavement, the rusted mailboxes, the faded American flag hanging limp from a porch across the road. James didn't move. He sat straight, eyes forward, both hands visible on the steering wheel, 10 and 2, just like he'd taught his own son decades ago. The driver's door of the cruiser opened. Boots hit pavement, heavy, purposeful. "Turn the engine off." The voice came sharp through a loudspeaker, stripped of warmth. James reached slowly, deliberately, and turned the key. The truck shuddered once before falling silent. "Hands where I can see them." "They are," James said calmly, his voice deep but even. Another pause. Then footsteps approached his window. Officer Kyle Bennett was young, early 30s maybe, tall, broad, jaw tight, like he was already annoyed before the conversation even began. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleamed, his hand rested casually on the strap near his holster, not drawing but not relaxed either. "License and registration," Bennett said. James nodded once. "They're in my wallet and glove box." "Don't reach until I tell you to." "Yes, sir." Bennett stared at him for a beat longer than necessary, eyes scanning the cab of the truck, the cracked vinyl seat, the lunch pail on the floor, the broom handle poking out from the back. A janitor's truck. Bennett exhaled through his nose. "Go ahead." James moved slowly, every motion careful, practiced. He handed over his license first, then leaned to open the glove compartment. The officer took the documents, glanced down at the license. James Carter, age 67, occupation line blank. Bennett's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home. Just finished my shift." "What shift would that be?" James hesitated just long enough to be noticed. "Maintenance, night cleaning." Bennett's lips curled faintly. "At the station," James added quietly. That got a reaction. Bennett looked up. "The police station?" "Yes, sir. Been there a long time." "How long is a long time?" James met his gaze. "Longer than you've been alive." The silence that followed sharpened. Bennett straightened. "You got a smart mouth on you?" "No, sir," James said evenly. "Just an honest one." Bennett stepped back half a pace, scanning James again, the lined face, the gray in his beard, the calm eyes that didn't flinch or bow. "You know why I pulled you over?" James shook his head. "No, sir." "Your tail light's out." James nodded. "Didn't realize. I'll fix it." "Uh-huh." Bennett walked back toward his cruiser, radio crackling softly as he ran the license. James waited. He always waited. Minutes passed. The street seemed to hold its breath. James glanced in the side mirror and caught sight of the station building just a few blocks away, its brick facade barely visible past the trees. He swallowed. When Bennett returned, his tone had changed, sharper, colder. "Step out of the vehicle." James blinked once. "Sir?" "Out of the vehicle, now." James obeyed. The night air was cool against his skin as he stepped onto the pavement, closing the door gently behind him. "Hands on the hood." James complied, palms flat, fingers spread. Bennett stood close behind him now, presence heavy. "You got anything on you I should know about?" "No, sir." "No weapons?" "No, sir." "No drugs?" "No, sir." Bennett scoffed. "You sure about that?" James didn't respond. The officer circled him slowly, eyes narrowing, stopping at the calloused hands, the faded jacket with paint stains, the boots worn down at the heels. A janitor's truck. Bennett exhaled through his nose. "You people always say that." James stiffened, not visibly, but inside. "You people?" he repeated quietly. Bennett stopped. "You want to make this difficult?" "No, sir," James said evenly. "I want to go home." "Then keep your mouth shut." James closed his eyes for half a second. Behind them, another cruiser slowed, then stopped. A second officer stepped out, older, late 40s maybe, Sergeant Linda Morales. She watched the scene with careful eyes. "Everything all right here, Bennett?" she called. Bennett straightened. "Routine stop, Sergeant." Morales's gaze moved to James. Something flickered across her face. Recognition? Confusion? "Mr. Carter?" she asked. James turned his head slightly. "Evening, Sergeant." Bennett frowned. "You know him?" Morales stepped closer, studying James more closely now. "Yes," she said slowly. "I do." Bennett looked between them. "From where?" Morales didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked James, "Are you heading home from the station?" "Yes, ma'am."
Her expression softened, just a fraction. She turned to Bennett. "You can let him go." Bennett stiffened. "Sergeant, his tail light. I'll handle it." "But that's an order." Bennett's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. James lowered his hands, rolling his shoulders gently, relief and something heavier mixing in his chest. Before he could speak, Morales looked at him and said quietly, "They've started renovations again, digging near the foundation." James's eyes flicked up sharply. "Yes," he said, "I heard." Morales nodded. "I told them to be careful." James exhaled slowly. "Good." Bennett watched, confused, irritation growing. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Morales turned to him. "This man," she said, voice firm, "helped build this station." The words landed like a dropped weight. Bennett stared at James. James met his gaze, not angry, not smug, just tired and proud. Officer Bennett didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at James Carter as if someone had quietly rewritten the rules of gravity and forgotten to tell him. The red and blue lights still flashed behind them, washing the street in alternating color, but the tension had shifted. It was no longer sharp and aggressive. It was unsettled. "He helped build the station?" Bennett finally said, disbelief slipping into his voice. Sergeant Morales didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Yes," she said, "with his own hands." James adjusted his jacket, eyes lowered now, not out of shame, but habit. He had learned long ago that humility survived longer than pride. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Doesn't matter now." Morales looked at him. "It does." Bennett let out a short laugh, the kind that tried to cover confusion with confidence. "Come on, the station was built in the 70s. This guy would have been, what, barely out of high school?" James lifted his eyes then, calm, steady. "I was 21, he said. "Concrete crew, night shifts." Bennett's mouth opened, then closed again. Morales folded her arms. "You ever wonder why the foundation on the East Wing never cracked? Why that building held through the earthquake in '94 when half the block didn't?" Bennett hesitated. "I never thought about it." "Because men like him poured it right," Morales said, "and because they were paid less than half what others made and still showed up every day." The street felt quieter now. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Bennett glanced down at James' boots again. This time he noticed the way they were cleaned, the way the laces were neatly tied despite their age. "You work maintenance now?" Bennett asked, his tone different, less sharp but not yet respectful. James nodded. "Keeps me busy, keeps me useful." Morales sighed. "James has been cleaning that station longer than I've been wearing a badge." Bennett looked at her. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" She met his gaze. Did you ask? That stung. James shifted his weight. It's all right, Sergeant. People see what they expect to see. Bennett's face flushed slightly. I wasn't... Morales raised a hand. We're done here. She turned to James. Your taillight really is out. I'll have someone take care of it tomorrow. James smiled faintly. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, You still bringing your lunch tomorrow? James nodded. Every night. Morales smiled. Good. She turned back toward her cruiser. Bennett remained frozen. Sir, suddenly. James paused, hand on his truck door. Yes? Bennett swallowed. I didn't know. James studied him for a moment, really looked at him. The youth, the rigid posture, the need to feel in control. I know, James said. That's how it usually goes. He got into his truck and drove away, the engine coughing softly as it disappeared down the street. Then it stood there long after the taillights vanished. The police station felt different that night. It always did after something unsettled the air. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as officers moved through the halls, radios crackling, phones ringing, paperwork stacking up like it always did. But the tension had shifted. It was no longer sharp and aggressive. It was unsettled. He helped build the station? Bennett asked, his tone different, less sharp but not yet respectful. James nodded. Keeps me busy, keeps me useful. Morales sighed. James has been cleaning that station longer than I've been wearing a badge. Bennett looked at her. Why didn't anyone tell me? She met his gaze. Did you ask? That stung. James shifted his weight. It's all right, Sergeant. People see what they expect to see. Bennett's face flushed slightly. I wasn't... Morales raised a hand. We're done here. She turned to James. Your taillight really is out. I'll have someone take care of it tomorrow. James smiled faintly. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, You still bringing your lunch tomorrow? James nodded. Every night. Morales smiled. Good. She turned back toward her cruiser. Bennett remained frozen. Sir, suddenly. James paused, hand on his truck door. Yes? Bennett swallowed. I didn't know. James studied him for a moment, really looked at him. The youth, the rigid posture, the need to feel in control. I know, James said. That's how it usually goes. He got into his truck and drove away, the engine coughing softly as it disappeared down the street. Then it stood there long after the taillights vanished. The police station felt different that night. It always did after something unsettled the air. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as officers moved through the halls, radios crackling, phones ringing, paperwork stacking up like it always did. But the tension had shifted. It was no longer sharp and aggressive. It was unsettled. He helped build the station? Bennett asked, his tone different, less sharp but not yet respectful. James nodded. Keeps me busy, keeps me useful. Morales sighed. James has been cleaning that station longer than I've been wearing a badge. Bennett looked at her. Why didn't anyone tell me? She met his gaze. Did you ask? That stung. James shifted his weight. It's all right, Sergeant. People see what they expect to see. Bennett's face flushed slightly. I wasn't... Morales raised a hand. We're done here. She turned to James. Your taillight really is out. I'll have someone take care of it tomorrow. James smiled faintly. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, You still bringing your lunch tomorrow? James nodded. Every night. Morales smiled. Good. She turned back toward her cruiser. Bennett remained frozen. Sir, suddenly. James paused, hand on his truck door. Yes? Bennett swallowed. I didn't know. James studied him for a moment, really looked at him. The youth, the rigid posture, the need to feel in control. I know, James said. That's how it usually goes. He got into his truck and drove away, the engine coughing softly as it disappeared down the street.
Bennett stood there long after the taillights vanished. The police station felt different that night. It always did after something unsettled the air. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as officers moved through the halls, radios crackling, phones ringing, paperwork stacking up like it always did. But Bennett couldn't shake the image of James Carter standing calmly with his hands on the hood, dignified, quiet, carrying decades no one had bothered to notice. He sat at his desk, staring at his report screen without typing. "You all right?" a fellow officer asked, passing by. "Yeah," Bennett said quickly, "just tired." But that wasn't it. Across the building, James pushed his cleaning cart down the east corridor, mop bucket rolling softly behind him. The smell of disinfectant mixed with old brick and memories. He worked methodically, just as he always had. He cleaned offices where decisions were made, hallways where arguments echoed, holding rooms where fear lingered long after people left. He cleaned without complaint. Always had. As he wiped down the bulletin board near the locker rooms, his eyes drifted to a faded photo pinned near the corner, black and white, curling at the edges. A group of young men stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a skeletal brick building, concrete mixers behind them, faces tired but proud. James was there, third from the left. He reached up and straightened the photo slightly, just as footsteps echoed behind him. "Mr. Carter?" James turned. Officer Bennett stood there, helmet tucked under his arm, expression unsure. "Yes?" Bennett cleared his throat. "Sergeant Morales said you worked here before." James nodded. "Built it. Clean it now." "That's a long time." James smiled faintly. "Time passes whether you notice it or not." Bennett glanced at the photo. "That you?" "Yes." Bennett stepped closer, studying it. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" James shrugged. "Nobody asked." Silence stretched between them. "I pulled you over tonight because I thought—" James raised a hand gently. "You thought what you were trained to think." Bennett flinched. "That's not—" "It is, and that doesn't make you evil, just young." Bennett's jaw tightened. "I treated you like you didn't matter." James met his eyes. "I've survived worse." That landed heavier than anger ever could. Bennett looked away. "I'm sorry." James nodded once. Apology accepted. "You don't even know me," James replied. "I know enough. You stayed. You asked. That's a start." Bennett exhaled slowly. "Sergeant Morales said the renovations might disturb the foundation." James's expression changed then, just slightly. "They won't, if they listen." "Listen to who?" James tapped the wall gently with his knuckles. "To the building, to the people who built it." Bennett frowned. "That sounds poetic." James smiled. "Concrete tells the truth, always has." Bennett hesitated, then asked, "Why'd you stop building?" James's eyes softened. "Company folded, jobs dried up, and cleaning needed doing." "That's it?" James met his gaze. "That was enough." Footsteps echoed down the hall. Morales appeared at the corner, watching them quietly. "Everything all right?" "Yes, Sergeant," Bennett said quickly. Morales looked at James. "You good?" James nodded. "Always am." She studied Bennett for a long moment. "Are you learning something tonight?" Bennett swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Morales nodded. "Good. This building's full of lessons." She walked off. James picked up his mop again. Bennett watched him work, the steady movements, the care taken even in corners no one looked at. "You ever think about retiring?" James chuckled softly. "Every morning." "Why don't you?" James paused, then said, "Because places remember who shows up." Bennett didn't know what to say to that. Later that night, as Bennett sat alone in the locker room, he pulled up the station's history on his phone. Old photos, archived articles, names he'd never learned. And there it was, a mention buried deep in a decades-old newspaper scan. Local laborers complete East Precinct under budget, ahead of schedule. No faces listed, no follow-ups, just a line about a small crew working tirelessly through nights and weekends.
Bennett locked his phone and leaned back. The weight of the badge felt heavier now, not with power, with responsibility. And somewhere down the hall, James Carter kept cleaning, the same way he always had, unaware that the station was finally beginning to remember who held it up.
The first crack appeared at 2:17 a.m. It was small, hairline, easy to miss. Most people would have. James Carter didn't. He was halfway through mopping the East Wing hallway when he felt it, not heard, not saw, but felt it, a subtle vibration beneath his boots, like the building exhaling the wrong way. He stopped mid-swipe, the mop head dripping quietly onto the tile. He crouched slowly, setting the handle against the wall, and pressed his palm flat to the floor. Cold, solid, but wrong. James closed his eyes, letting memory do what it always did better than paperwork or blueprints. He remembered nights pouring concrete under halogen lights, remembered how the ground had shifted after a heavy rain back in '73, how they'd adjusted the mix to compensate. He remembered the foreman yelling to hurry and himself refusing, insisting they do it right. He stood and followed the feeling down the corridor, past the locker rooms, past the break area, toward the old evidence storage room, the part of the station everyone complained about but no one really checked. That's where he saw it, a crack running diagonally from the corner of the door frame down into the wall, thin as a pencil line, but fresh, new. James sucked in a slow breath. "That shouldn't be there," he murmured. Behind him, footsteps echoed. "You find something?" Officer Bennett stood a few feet back, holding a clipboard, eyebrows raised. James turned. "How long's the evidence room been locked up?" Bennett shrugged. "Years. They moved most of it to the annex. Why?" James gestured to the wall. "That crack." Bennett leaned closer. "Looks minor." James shook his head. "Cracks are never minor, they're just honest." Bennett frowned. "You serious?" "I wouldn't joke about this building," James said. Bennett glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You think it's structural?" James nodded slowly. "Foundation might be settling uneven. Could be stress from renovations upstairs." "They're adding new offices next month," Bennett said. "Steel framing, glass walls." James winced. "On top of this? You're saying it's dangerous?" "I'm saying it could be," James replied, "if no one listens." Bennett stared at the wall again, suddenly seeing it differently. "I should report this," he said. "Yes," James agreed. "You should." Bennett hesitated. "But I'm not the one they listen to yet." James studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then take pictures, document it. Be persistent." Bennett pulled out his phone and snapped several photos. "You really built this place?" he asked quietly. James smiled faintly. "Every inch I was assigned." Bennett swallowed. "You think you're the only one who'd notice something like this?" James met his eyes. "I know I am." By morning, the station buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Shift change brought fresh faces, tired eyes, and half-finished conversations. Bennett barely slept. He stood outside Captain Reynolds' office, photos ready on his tablet, heart thudding like he was about to confess something illegal. "Come in," the captain barked. Reynolds was a thick-necked man in his 50s, with a reputation for hating delays and loving numbers, budgets, metrics, appearances. "Yes, sir," Bennett said, stepping inside. "What is it?" Reynolds asked without looking down. "There's a potential structural issue in the East Wing. Cracks, possibly foundation stress." Sigh, and Reynolds leaned back. "You've been here 6 months, Bennett. You know how many potential issues we hear about?" "Sir, with respect, facilities handles that." "I spoke with James Carter, the janitor." Reynolds looked up sharply. "And?" "He helped build the station, concrete crew, '70s. Reynolds scoffed. "You're trusting a mop over an engineer?" Bennett stiffened. "I'm trusting experience."
Reynolds stood. Listen to me. We have inspectors scheduled next quarter. Until then, we don't need panic. It's not panic, sir. It's prevention. Reynolds pointed to the door. Drop it. Bennett left, jaw tight. Outside, Sergeant Morales leaned against the wall, arms crossed. They shut you down. Yes, ma'am. She nodded. They usually do. What do I do now? She studied him. What would James do? Bennett thought of James' calm voice, his patience. He'd keep showing up. Morales smiled faintly. Then do that. That afternoon, a city inspector arrived unexpectedly, not because of Bennett's report, because of a complaint filed anonymously about unsafe working conditions. James watched from the hallway as the inspector paced, clipboard in hand, frowning at the walls. Who reported this? No one answered. James didn't step forward. He didn't need credit. The inspector crouched, tapped the crack with a pen, then frowned deeper. This isn't cosmetic. Captain Reynolds' face tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying you might have a load-bearing issue. I'll need access to the old blueprints. Reynolds' jaw clenched. Those are archived. James cleared his throat. Everyone turned. I remember where they're stored, James said calmly. Hesitation flashed across Reynolds' face. You? Yes, James replied. I helped draw them. Silence fell heavy. The inspector raised an eyebrow. You're the builder? One of them, James said. Concrete and reinforcement. The inspector nodded slowly. Then you might just save us time. Reynolds looked like he'd swallowed something sour. James led them to a locked storage room in the basement, a room no one had opened in years. Dust coated the shelves, old file boxes sagged with age. James moved unerringly to a specific shelf, pulled out a binder, and handed it over. These are the East Wing specs, and here's where the stress point would show up first. The inspector scanned the pages, eyes widening slightly. You're right, he said. If they build on this without reinforcement, the foundation could fail. Reynolds' face paled. Fail how? The inspector said, crack, collapse, gradual or sudden. Depends. The room felt colder. Bennett exhaled shakily. Reynolds looked at James. Why didn't anyone know this? James shrugged. No one asked. The inspector closed the binder. We'll halt renovations until this is addressed. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Of course. As they left, Bennett caught up to James. You just saved this place. James smiled faintly. This place saved me once, too. Bennett frowned. How? James paused. It gave me work when nobody else would. That matters. Later, as officers buzzed with gossip about halted construction, James returned to his cart, mop in hand. Bennett watched him go, understanding something new settle into his bones. Respect wasn't given by uniforms. It was earned by showing up, again and again, long after applause faded. And beneath the badge, beneath the walls, beneath the city itself, the truth had been holding everything up all along. By noon, the rumor had grown legs. By 1 o'clock, it had teeth. And by 2, it had a microphone. News vans rolled up outside the station like vultures sensing a wounded animal, their satellite dishes tilted skyward, blinking red lights cutting through the afternoon haze. Reporters clustered behind yellow tape, voices urgent, cameras already rolling. Is it true the police station is structurally unsafe? Were renovations halted due to negligence? Did a janitor uncover what city engineers missed? Inside the building, the mood shifted from denial to damage control. Captain Reynolds stood in the conference room with 3 lieutenants, a city spokesperson on speakerphone, and a PR consultant who looked like he hadn't slept since the Clinton administration. This cannot turn into a scandal, Reynolds snapped, pacing. We follow protocol. We trust professionals. The consultant cleared his throat. Captain, the problem is the narrative. Reynolds stopped. What narrative? The one where a black janitor knew more about the building than the department, the consultant said carefully. That story writes itself. Reynolds bristled. He's not the issue, the consultant finished. But optics don't care about intent, they care about contrast. Across the hall, James Carter pushed his cart slowly, deliberately, the way he always did. He could feel eyes on him now. Whispers followed him like drafts through open doors. That's him, the janitor, the guy who built the place. He saved the station. They almost arrested him last night. James kept his gaze forward. He'd lived long enough to know attention was a double-edged thing. One moment it lifted you up, the next it cut. Officer Bennett caught up to him near the break room. "They're asking for you," Bennett said quietly. "Media." James stopped. "I don't talk to reporters." Bennett nodded. "I figured. They won't want the truth, they'll want a version." Bennett hesitated. "Captain Reynolds might make you talk." James met his eyes calmly. "Then he'll have to look me in the face while he does it." In the briefing room, tension hung thicker than stale coffee. Captain Reynolds stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. Around him sat officers from every shift, some curious, some irritated, some clearly uneasy. James stood near the back, hands folded in front of him. "We're under scrutiny," Reynolds began. "That means discipline, unity, silence unless authorized." Murmurs rippled through the room. "The story outside is wrong. This department maintains the highest safety standards." James raised his hand. The room stilled. Reynolds stared at him. "Mr. Carter, this is an internal briefing." James nodded. "I know." Reynolds hesitated, then gestured sharply. "Speak." James took a breath. "I poured the concrete under this building in 1973. I worked 12-hour shifts for 6 months. We had delays, budget cuts, pressure to rush. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. There was a storm," James continued, "flooded the East Trench. We were told to proceed anyway." "That's ancient history," Reynolds snapped. James' eyes hardened just a little. "Concrete doesn't forget." Silence. "If you build on compromised ground, it holds until it doesn't." Reynolds clenched his fists. "This is not the time." "It is exactly the time," Sergeant Morales cut in. Heads turned. Morales stood. "With respect, Captain, if Mr. Carter hadn't spoken up, we'd be building offices on a fault we didn't know existed." Reynolds' face reddened. "Are you undermining my authority?" "I'm defending common sense and the man who showed it." The room buzzed. Bennett stood next. "Sir, I was there. He noticed something no one else did. We should be thanking him, not silencing him." Reynolds looked around and realized too late that the room had shifted. James hadn't asked for allies, but he'd earned them. Outside, the press conference exploded before it even began. Vanessa Liu from Channel 7 leaned into her mic. "Sources inside the department confirm renovations were halted after a janitor who helped build the station decades ago raised concerns ignored by leadership." Another reporter chimed in. "Was there racial profiling involved during a traffic stop hours earlier?" That question hit like a brick. Inside his office, Reynolds stared at his phone, scrolling headlines faster than he could process them. Cop pulls over black janitor, then learns he built the station. From mop to blueprint, the man who exposed a city's blind spot. Did bias nearly cost a city its police headquarters? Reynolds slammed the phone down. "This is spiraling," he muttered. The city manager called, then the mayor, then internal affairs. James sat alone in the maintenance room, the hum of old fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. His cart stood untouched beside him. For the first time in years, he felt tired. Not in his body, in his bones. The door creaked open. Officer Bennett stepped in, closing it gently behind him. "They want to interview you. City officials, internal affairs." James nodded. "I figured. They're also reopening the traffic stop, the one from last night." James looked up slowly. "Good." Bennett swallowed. "You're not worried?" James smiled, faint but steady. "Son, I've been pulled over more times than you've been promoted. Truth ages better than lies." Bennett exhaled. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I. For now." That evening, James sat across from 3 investigators in a quiet office downtown. They asked about the stop, the flashlight, the tone, the assumptions. James answered calmly, precisely. No anger, no embellishment, just facts. When they asked how it felt to be treated like a suspect in a place he helped build, James paused. "That building," James said slowly,
was poured by hands that weren't invited to the dedication. That's how this country works sometimes. One investigator shifted. "Do you feel owed something?" James shook his head. "No, I feel seen, and that's new." As night fell, the station lights glowed against the dark sky. Renovations were officially suspended, an independent review was launched, and for the first time in decades, the department's foundation, literal and figurative, was under inspection. James walked out into the cool air, lunch pail in hand. Bennett waited by his car. "You okay?" Bennett asked. James nodded. "I will be." Bennett hesitated. "You ever think about retiring?" James smiled, looking back at the building. "I think about finishing what I started." Behind them, cameras flashed. The past was no longer buried. It was standing right in front of everyone, and it wasn't going anywhere.
By the next morning, the station no longer felt like a place of authority. It felt like a house with its walls opened up, wiring exposed, dust hanging in the air, every flaw suddenly visible. Internal affairs arrived just after 8 a.m., not quietly. 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the staff lot, followed by a third vehicle carrying a city compliance officer. Suits stepped out instead of uniforms, clipboards instead of radios, faces trained to observe, not reassure. Word spread fast. "They're here. IA's on the second floor. They're reopening everything." James Carter watched from the janitorial closet doorway as officers stiffened at their desks. Some sat straighter, some avoided eye contact. A few looked relieved. Truth did that. It scared the guilty and steadied the honest. Officer Miller, the one who had pulled James over the night before, sat alone near the lockers, staring at his phone like it might swallow him whole. His swagger was gone. His voice, usually loud, hadn't been heard all morning. Captain Reynolds called an emergency meeting. "Everyone listen up," he barked, trying to sound in control. "Internal Affairs is conducting a routine inquiry. Cooperation is mandatory. Speculation is not." A hand went up. Sergeant Morales again. "Is the traffic stop under review, sir?" she asked. Reynolds hesitated half a second too long. "Yes." Murmurs rippled. "Is Officer Miller on duty?" another officer asked. Reynolds exhaled sharply. "He's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." The room went quiet. James stood at the back, arms folded loosely. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. In a small interview room downtown, Officer Miller sat across from 2 internal affairs investigators. He wiped his palms on his pants, jaw tight. "Walk us through the stop," Investigator Klein said evenly. Miller leaned forward. "I observed a vehicle matching the description of one used in recent vandalism reports. Late hour, driver appeared nervous." "What description?" Klein asked. Miller hesitated. "Dark sedan." Klein raised an eyebrow. "That's broad." Miller swallowed. "It was suspicious." The second investigator, Alvarez, slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, body cam footage. James' calm voice, Miller's escalating tone, the flashlight beam lingering, the demand for explanations that never came. "Did you know who Mr. Carter was?" Alvarez asked. "No," Miller said quickly. "Did you assume he didn't belong in that neighborhood?" Miller stiffened. "I don't assume things." Alvarez didn't blink. "The footage suggests otherwise." Miller's voice cracked. "I was doing my job." Klein leaned back. "Your job doesn't include intimidation without cause." Silence stretched. "Did you know Mr. Carter helped build the station?" Alvarez asked. "No," Miller said, almost violently. "But you know now," Klein said. "Yes. And how does that make you feel?" Miller's shoulders sagged. "Like an idiot." Klein nodded. "That's not the charge." Meanwhile, James sat in a separate office with a city compliance officer and a structural engineer. Blueprints lay spread across the table like a map of memory. James pointed to a section with a calloused finger.
Here, rebar spacing. We compensated for water damage, but only barely. The engineer frowned. This wouldn't pass modern code. It passed the budget, James replied quietly. The compliance officer scribbled notes. If renovations continued, you'd risked collapse, James finished. Not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but eventually. The engineer looked at him with new respect. You remembered all this? James smiled faintly. Some things stick when you've bled on them. Outside, the city reacted. Talk radio lit up. I'm telling you, this man built the place. How many people like him get ignored every day? This is bigger than one traffic stop. Social media exploded with photos of James from decades ago. Grainy shots of construction crews, hard hats, lunch pails, young men smiling under a sun that didn't promise much. Someone found an old union newsletter with James's name listed under outstanding work. The caption read, "He built it. They forgot him." At the station, Officer Bennett found James in the hallway. They're calling you a hero, Bennett said. James sighed. They'll call me something else tomorrow. But things are changing, Bennett insisted. You see that, right? James looked around. Officers nodded at him now. Some smiled. Some looked ashamed. I see it, James said. I've seen change before. It just takes a while to believe it sticks. Bennett hesitated. IA might recommend discipline for Miller. Suspension, maybe worse. James nodded. That's their job. You're not angry? Bennett asked. James considered that. Anger is a young man's fuel. I'm running on something steadier. What's that? Truth, James said. It burns slower, but it lasts. That afternoon, Captain Reynolds was summoned to City Hall. He sat across from the mayor, the city manager, and a legal advisor who didn't smile once. This department failed to listen, the mayor said bluntly. To its people, to its history. Reynolds stiffened. We followed procedure. You followed habit, the city manager replied. There's a difference. The legal advisor slid a document across the table. We're recommending mandatory bias training, leadership review, and a public acknowledgement of Mr. Carter's contributions. Reynolds stared at the paper. A janitor? The mayor's eyes hardened. A builder. Reynolds swallowed. That evening, James stood outside the station as the sun dipped low, painting the building in amber light. Officer Miller approached slowly, no uniform, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Mr. Carter, he said quietly. James turned. Officer? Miller hesitated. I wanted to say I was wrong. James studied him, seeing fear, pride, regret all tangled together. I know, James said. Miller blinked. That's it? James nodded. That's enough to start. Miller exhaled shakily. I don't know what's going to happen. James placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. Neither do I, but you'll know what to do next time. Miller nodded, eyes wet, and walked away. Inside the station, renovations remained frozen. Outside, the city waited. And beneath it all, the foundation, both concrete and conscience, was finally being tested. James picked up his cart and headed down the hallway, mop in hand. The work wasn't done, but it had finally begun.
The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. City Hall hadn't been this crowded in years. By 8:30 a.m., the marble steps outside were lined with reporters, retirees clutching folded newspapers, union workers in faded jackets, and young activists holding signs that read, "Dignity is not optional," and "He built this city too." James Carter stood at the edge of it all, hat in his hands, feeling every one of his 70 years settle into his knees. He had never liked attention. He built things so others could stand inside them, not so they would look at him. But today, the city was looking back. Inside the council chamber, the air buzzed with tension. Microphones were tested, cameras adjusted. City officials whispered behind folders thick with documents that should have been read years ago. James sat in the second row. Front row seats were offered. He refused. "I've spent my life behind the scenes," he'd said quietly. "No reason to change that now." Officer Miller wasn't there. Administrative leave meant exactly that. But plenty of uniforms filled the room, some stiff-backed, some uneasy, some clearly angry that things had gone this far. Captain Reynolds sat rigidly at the witness table, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. When the mayor called the hearing to order, the room fell silent. "This is not a trial," she began. "This is an accounting." Her eyes scanned the room before settling briefly on James. "An accounting of how we treat people who built this city and how easily we forget them." The first speaker was the city compliance officer. She laid out facts, dry, measured, unforgiving. Structural shortcuts approved under budget pressure, ignored maintenance warnings, historical records buried in storage rooms no one bothered to catalog. "This building stands," she concluded, "because men like Mr. Carter compensated for decisions made above their pay grade." Murmurs rippled. Next came the engineer. "This station," he said plainly, "does not meet current safety standards. It hasn't for years. Mr. Carter's memory of reinforcement locations likely prevented a catastrophic error during the last renovation." A councilman leaned forward. "You're saying a janitor knew more about the building than our contractors?" The engineer didn't hesitate. "Yes." A pause. Then quiet applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. The mayor raised her gavel, but her eyes softened. Captain Reynolds was called next. He stood slowly, adjusting his uniform, face flushed. "Captain," the mayor said, "how long has Mr. Carter worked at the station?" Reynolds cleared his throat. 42 years. "And how many times has his service been formally acknowledged?" Reynolds hesitated. "I don't have that information." "Because there isn't any," the mayor replied. Reynolds stiffened. "With respect, Mayor, Mr. Carter is a civilian employee." "So were the men who built the Brooklyn Bridge," she said sharply, "and we still remember their names." The room went still. "Do you believe Officer Miller's stop reflected department values?" the mayor asked. Reynolds chose his words carefully. "It reflected a lapse of judgment." "Systemic lapses are not accidents, they are habits." Reynolds said nothing. Then came the moment James dreaded. "Mr. James Carter," the clerk announced, "would you please come forward?" Every head turned. James rose slowly, feeling the weight of decades in the hush that followed. As he walked to the podium, he noticed something unexpected. People stood. Not all, but enough. He placed his hands on the wood, worn smooth by years of use, and looked out at a city he had helped shape but never addressed. "I didn't plan to speak," James began, voice steady but low. "I came to listen." He paused. "But it seems I've been listening my whole life." He glanced briefly toward the officers. "I built that station when I was 25, had a young wife, a baby on the way. We worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, cut corners when told, fixed them when we could." He swallowed. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because the job needed doing." A reporter lowered her camera. James continued. "When I got pulled over, what hurt wasn't the flashlight, it wasn't the tone, it was the feeling that none of it mattered, that everything I'd poured into this city could disappear behind a uniform and a badge." His voice tightened slightly. "I've scrubbed floors officers walk across every day, floors I helped lay, and that was fine. Honest work is honest work." He looked directly at the council. "But dignity should come with it." Silence pressed heavy. "I don't want punishment. I want remembrance, accountability, in a city that doesn't wait 40 years to realize who's standing right in front of it." He stepped back. The room erupted. Not applause, something deeper. Agreement.
Outside, the story spread faster than anyone could manage. Veterans called into radio shows, retired builders dug out old photographs, former officers admitted things they'd never said aloud. This could have been my father. This was my uncle. This is happening everywhere. The city couldn't unhear it. By evening, decisions came swiftly. Officer Miller's disciplinary process was formally announced. Captain Reynolds was placed under leadership review. Mandatory training reforms were approved unanimously. But one motion silenced the room. We propose renaming the station's main hall to honor James Carter, master builder, city employee, and witness to our better and worse selves. The vote passed without opposition. James didn't know until Mrs. Alvarez from Records hugged him in the hallway crying. "They're naming it after you," she said. James blinked. "That's a bit much." She smiled through tears. "It's overdue." That night, James sat alone on his porch, the city humming softly around him. For the first time in years, his phone kept ringing. Old coworkers, union reps, a reporter he didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, scarred, steady, real. He hadn't asked to be seen, but he wouldn't hide either. Across town, in a small apartment, Officer Miller sat at his kitchen table, staring at his uniform folded neatly beside him. He replayed the stop over and over, not with anger, with clarity. The city had looked back, and it had seen itself. Not perfect, but capable of change.
The dedication ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday. James Carter tried to talk them out of it. "There are men who deserve this more," he said at least 3 times, once to the mayor's aide, once to the union representative, and once to Mrs. Alvarez, who simply crossed her arms and stared him down. "You spent your life letting other people step forward," she told him. "This time, you're standing still and letting the moment come to you." He didn't argue after that. But the morning of the ceremony, James woke before dawn with a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with age. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at his work boots, scuffed leather, still stained faintly with cement dust from jobs decades old. Those boots had carried him through winters without heat, summers without shade, and years without recognition. Today, they wanted him in a suit. He put it on anyway. The station looked different when James arrived. Banners hung from the railings, metal barricades guided foot traffic. A small stage had been erected in front of the building he helped raise 45 years earlier. Above the main entrance, covered by a blue cloth, was the new plaque. James refused to read the inscription beforehand. "I'll see it when everyone else does," he said quietly. People filled the street. Retirees leaning on canes, young officers standing straighter than usual, construction workers with hard hats tucked under their arms. James spotted faces he hadn't seen in decades, men who once shared thermoses and jokes atop steel beams, now gray-haired, slower, but smiling wide. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. "You still standing, old man?" a voice laughed. James turned and blinked. "Frank?" Frank Delgado grinned, missing 2 teeth and none of his humor. "Told you we'd outlast him." They embraced, stiffly, awkwardly, honestly. The mayor spoke first, then the police chief, then the union president. Each speech carried words James had never heard attached to his name: cornerstone, integrity, legacy. But the moment that tightened his throat came when a young officer stepped forward, barely 25, nervous hands gripping note cards. "My name is Officer Tyler Grant, and I patrol this station every night." He paused, eyes flicking briefly to James. "I used to think buildings were just buildings, but now I know they carry stories, and if we don't listen to the people who built them, we're standing on borrowed ground." The crowd murmured. Grant swallowed. "I hope one day I earn even a fraction of the respect Mr. Carter earned without ever asking for it." James looked down. His hands trembled. When the cloth was finally pulled away, the plaque caught the sunlight. The James Carter Hall, built by the hands that believed in this city before it believed in them. The crowd applauded. Some wiped their eyes. James didn't move. Not at first. He stared at the words like they might change if he blinked. Frank leaned in. "You all right?" James nodded slowly. "Just trying to recognize my own name." But honor, James would learn, doesn't arrive alone. It brings weight, questions, and consequences no one prepares you for. 2 days later, James was called into the mayor's office. He assumed it was ceremonial, a photo, a handshake, maybe a thank you letter. Instead, the room felt tense. The mayor gestured for him to sit. "We've received a proposal, one that directly involves you." James frowned. "I'm retired, mostly." She smiled faintly. "That's part of the problem." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were architectural plans, new ones. City Council wants to commission a full structural audit of all municipal buildings constructed between 1970 and 1990, she explained. They want you as lead historical consultant. James blinked. "Me?" "You know where corners were cut," she said plainly, "where reinforcements were added quietly, where safety depended on human judgment, not blueprints." James leaned back slowly. "That's a big responsibility." "Yes," she agreed, "and a necessary one." He looked down at his hands again. He had just been honored for surviving invisibility. Now they wanted him to step into visibility permanently. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. The mayor didn't hesitate. "We move forward without the truth." James exhaled. "Then I don't think I can say no." News traveled fast, too fast. Within days, James's quiet porch became a revolving door. Journalists, activists, former co-workers bringing coffee and concern. Some wanted interviews, others wanted validation, and a few wanted something else entirely. "You're stirring things up," a former city contractor muttered one afternoon. "Be careful whose foundations you shake." James met his gaze evenly. Foundations that crack deserve attention. The man didn't come back. Officer Miller reached out that same week. He didn't call, he wrote a letter, handwritten. James read it twice before folding it carefully. "I was wrong, not just in how I stopped you, but in what I assumed about you, about who belongs where. I don't expect forgiveness, but I won't forget what you taught me." James placed the letter in his drawer. Not for display, not for dismissal, just acknowledgement. As James began reviewing old records, he noticed something unsettling. Patterns. Buildings with unusually frequent repairs, stations renovated without permits, emergency fixes quietly approved and buried. "This isn't just negligence," he muttered one night, papers spread across his kitchen table. "This is erasure." Mrs. Alvarez, helping organize files, nodded grimly. "People forget because it's convenient." James shook his head. "No, people forget because someone benefits when they do." The city resisted, quietly at first, then louder. Budget concerns were raised, timelines questioned, voices suggested James was too emotionally involved. "You want me detached from my own history?" James asked one councilman flatly. "That's how we got here." The room fell silent. Then came the turning point. A preliminary audit revealed a fire station across town with a compromised load-bearing wall, one James distinctly remember reinforcing after a supervisor dismissed concerns. Repairs were ordered immediately. Lives were potentially saved. The city could no longer argue with results. At home that night, James sat on his porch, the streetlights flickering on one by one. He felt tired, but it was a good tired, the kind earned, not imposed. Mrs. Alvarez called him from her porch down the block. "You okay?" James smiled. "I think I finally am." Honor had come, but so had responsibility,
And James Carter, who spent a lifetime holding up walls without applause, had become something unexpected, a man the city could no longer ignore.
The city felt quieter after everything slowed down. Not silent, just steadier. James Carter noticed it on his morning walks, the way people held doors a second longer, the way younger officers nodded, not out of obligation, but recognition, the way the station itself seemed to breathe differently, as if it knew it had finally been seen. He still wore his janitor's jacket some mornings, not because he had to, because he wanted to remember. The final audit report landed on the city council's desk 3 weeks later. It was thick, meticulous, honest. James had refused to soften language or hide findings. These buildings didn't fail, he told the committee during the last review. People failed to listen to the ones holding them together. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Good. Truth was never meant to be comfortable. The report led to funding reallocations, public apologies, and, quietly, the resignation of 2 officials who had approved unsafe shortcuts decades earlier. No press conference, no spectacle, just accountability. James didn't celebrate, he slept better. The station itself underwent renovations, carefully this time. When construction crews arrived, James walked the site with them, pointing out reinforcements he remembered installing with his own hands. "Here," he said once, tapping a beam, "we doubled this after a storm collapsed the old frame." The foreman raised an eyebrow. "There's no record of that." James smiled faintly. "That's because the men who did it weren't allowed to sign their names." The beam stayed. Officer Miller showed up one afternoon near the end of construction. No uniform, just jeans and an uneasy posture. "I heard you might be here," he said. James nodded, gesturing toward a bench. They sat in silence for a long moment. "I'm transferring," Miller finally said. "Different district, community outreach." James studied him. "That's so?" Miller nodded. "I need to relearn how to see people." James considered that. "That takes time, and humility." "I know," Miller replied quietly. "I'm working on both." James stood, extending a hand. Miller hesitated, then took it. That was all that needed saying. The dedication plaque remained above the station entrance, polished weekly. Tourists stopped to read it. School groups asked questions. One afternoon, James overheard a child ask his teacher, "Why is a janitor's name on the building?" The teacher smiled. "Because someone has to care enough to keep things standing." James turned away before his eyes betrayed him. The city offered James a permanent advisory role. Office, assistant, parking spot. He declined most of it. He said, "I'll consult, but I don't need a title. Titles end, work doesn't." They agreed, on his terms. At home, James finally opened the old box under his bed. Inside were photos, black and white snapshots of men on scaffolding, laughing mid-lift, sharing sandwiches on beams hundreds of feet above ground. Men who never got plaques, men whose names were lost to time. James spread the photos across his kitchen table. Then he did something he'd never done before. He labeled them, carefully, one by one. The local paper ran a final piece weeks later. Not about scandal, not about blame, just a quiet story titled "The Man Who Held the City Together." James read it once, then folded it neatly, then recycled it. The legacy wasn't in the ink. It was in the concrete. On the anniversary of the station's reopening, the city hosted a modest gathering. No speeches, no cameras, just coffee, conversation, and shared space. James stood near the entrance, watching people move freely through a place that had once almost collapsed, physically and morally. Mrs. Alvarez joined him. "They finally did right by you," she said.
James shook his head gently. They did right by the truth. She smiled. That's bigger. As dusk settled, the lights flickered on inside the station. Warm. Steady. James felt something loosen in his chest. A lifetime of being unseen had ended, not with applause, but with understanding. He turned to leave, then paused. His hand rested briefly against the brick wall. Solid. Faithful. Still standing. Some legacies are loud. They demand statues and speeches. Others are quieter. They live in the walls that don't crack, the doors that stay open, the people who finally learn to look twice. James Carter walked home under a sky turning gold at the edges, knowing one simple truth. You don't have to be remembered by name to matter. But when the truth stands tall long enough, the world eventually learns whose hands built it.